In this video, we are going to see a Blazor component that makes our life easy when we have to work with grids. The idea is that sometimes we may want to present data in a table format, and we may want to filter, sort, and paginate in a very easy manner. And for that we can use the QuickGrid component. This is a component that was created by Microsoft. And as you can see here, we have an example. I can easily order by name, or by this column, or by the silver column, or the bronze column. And also we can paginate, as you can see here. So the first thing that we're going to do in this video is that we're going to see an example of how to use this component with data in memory. After that, we're going to use this same component but with data that comes from a web API. So let's get started. Let's go to Visual Studio. I will create a Blazor WebAssembly application. This component also works with Blazor Server, but in our case, we're going to use it with Blazor WebAssembly. So let's click on Next. I'll say Blazor Grid Demo ENG. Next, I'm going to be using .NET 7 and ASP.NET Core hosted, and I'll click on Create. The first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to install the package. So let's go to the client project. Let's go to Manage NuGet Packages. I'll go to Browse, and I'll paste the name of the package, which is Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components QuickGrid. Make sure you check Include Pre-Release because this component is only in pre-release mode. So let me click on Install, Accept, and also, just so that we can have test data in a really easy manner, we're going to install the Faker.NET package. So let me install this, Accept. Now let me create a model that we're going to use for our first example. It is going to be a person model, so we're going to go to the Share project and we're going to create a class, Person. And I will paste this here. As you can see, we have several properties like ID, first name, last name, score, active, and date of birth. And now what we want to do is to have some test data so that we can show it in a grid. So for that, we're going to go to the index component. So let's go to Pages, Index, and in here I will create a code section so that we can write C# code. I'll just say public list person get people. This is going to be a method for getting test data of a person or a list of people. Bar result equal to new list of person, and then we're going to return that. And in here we're going to create 100 people. And as you can see here, we are doing just that. We're creating 100 people, and we're using the Faker.NET library to get a random first name, a random last name, a random date of birth, a random boolean, and also a random number that goes from 0 to 100. Now after that, I'm going to come here and I'm going to create two properties which are going to store our collection of people. I'm going to use iQueryable because that is the data type that the QuickGrid component has to use, has to receive. So let's say here person. I'm going to call this one original people, which is going to have the original list of people. And also I will repeat that and I will have a iQueryable of people, which is the one that I'm going to pass to the QuickGrid component. Now let me say protected, override, uninitialize, and I'll say original, get people, and asQueryable. asQueryable because this returns a list of person. And then after that, I will say people equal to original people. Again, as we said, we're going to do a first example with data in memory. So now let's get to use our component. So let's come here. I'll say QuickGrid, control dot, to import this namespace. And then after that, I want to say items, and I'm going to pass people. Let's make a first simple example. I'll say property column. A property column component allows me to put a column in the QuickGrid with the data of one of the properties, in this case of a person. So I will say property. I have to use a lambda expression here and say, for example, ID. So let's see what we got. Let me press Ctrl F5 to run our application. And as expected, we have this simple table with a single column with the ID value, and as you can see, it goes from 1 to 100. Now this is really boring, so let's see what we can do. Something simple that we can do is to say here sortable equal to true, which is going to allow me to sort by this column. And also, since as you can see it is ordered by default in an ascending manner, I should say here is default sort direction ascending. Now let me put this in another line so that you can visualize everything better. Let me compile and let's go back here. And as you can see, we can now sort by this column. As you can see here, now it is in descending order and now it is in ascending order. Now let's add the rest of the columns. Now as you can see, we have the rest of the columns from first name all the way through active, and also I marked all of them as sortable. Now let's see what we got. Let me compile and let's go back to Google Chrome. And as we can see here, we have all of the data and we can also sort by the different columns that we have. Of course, as we may imagine, if I don't want to sort by a column, I can just put this as false. But in my case, I'll just leave it as true. We can also control the title of a column. For example, here we have first name, but I want to have it in two words, first and name, so I can do the following. I can come here and say title, first name, compile, and let's go back here. And as you can see, we have first name. Another thing that I can do is to align the content of a cell. For example, this is a number, and I want to have it so that it is aligned at the right of the cell. So let's do that. Let's go back here and let's go to score, and let me say align right. I want to have it at the right. So let's compile, let's go back here, and let's see that indeed now the score is aligned at the right. Also, I can control the format of the content of a cell. For example, I want to control the format of this date of birth. I can do that. Let's come back here and let's go to date of birth and let's say format, and I can choose whatever format I want. For example, I can use DD, MM, and the year. Now let's compile and let's go back here, and as you can see, we have modified the format. We can also use expressions to transform the data of a cell. For example, let's say that I want this last name to be uppercase. So let's do that. Let's come back here, and what I can do is to say here in last name to upper. So as you can see, I can use arbitrary C# code to transform the data of a cell, as you can see here. But if you do that, keep in mind that now I have to put the title explicitly. So let's go back here and let's do it. Let's say here title, last name, and that will fix this issue. If I need more freedom, I can use a template column. So far we have been using property column, which allows me to present a simple value. But what if I want to put, for example, a checkbox or a button? For that we can use a template column. So let's see an example of that. Let me say here template column, and I'll put a title here, actions, and then I will say button. I'm going to put here a button. Let's say that it is an edit button. Let's say class button primary, and then I will say on click, and I will use a lambda expression so that I can say edit, and I will pass context, where context just means the data of the person. Now let me create this method. Let's come here. I'll say private void edit person p, and what I want to do is to put a message in the string. So let me say here prop string message. I'll make this nullable, and let's come here paragraph message, and then I'll come here and I'll say message equal to editing p dot first name, semicolon here. And of course I need to concatenate this. Now let's compile and let's see what we got. Let's come back here, and as you can see here we have an edit button, and if I click on here, for example, we have editing Francesco, or for example Alfonso, or whatever person I click. Now let's work on filtering. Let's suppose that we want to filter if the person is active or not. So for that, we're going to go back here, and first I need to have a reference of the QuickGrid component, because after we filter the iQueryable, I need to refresh the QuickGrid. And for that, we need to have it in a variable. So let's come here, and I'll say QuickGrid of person, and the name of the variable is going to be grid, and in here I will use the ref attribute, and I'll put here grid, so that now we can have a reference of the QuickGrid instance in this variable, and then we're going to put a pop-up in this active column. So let's come here, I will expand this property column, I'll say column options, I'll put a label, input type checkbox, I'll use a bind, active only, we're going to create that variable in just a moment, and also we're going to use bind after because I want to execute an asynchronous function every time we click on this checkbox. So I will say filter, and let me say here active only. Now sadly, at the moment we're recording this video, there is a bug with bind after, which is why we have these red squiggly lines as if they are indicating that we have an error, but we don't have any errors. This is because of a bug. Hopefully in the future this will be fixed. For now, we just have to tolerate it. So let's go to here, and I want to create a private bool active only, and also let's create this filter method. So let me copy this and let's come down here and let's create this filter method, and I will say if active only. Here is where we're going to use our original people iQueryable, because I'm going to say people equal to people original dot where active. So we're filtering out the inactive people. And also I will say else people equal to original people, because in this case we don't care if the person is active or not. And now we have to refresh the grid, so we're going to say await grid refresh data async. Remember that this grid variable holds a reference to the instance of the QuickGrid component. And now we're ready to test. Let's compile and let's go back here, and we're going to see that I can click on here and I can say only active, and let's see that for example we have Dave, which is false here, and if I click on here, now we don't have Dave anymore, and if I uncheck this, we have Dave back in. So as you can see, it is really simple to filter using this component. Another thing that it is really simple is to paginate. Let's see that. Let's come back here. We need a pagination state, which is going to hold how many items per page we want to show. And now I have to copy this and come here to the QuickGrid component and say pagination, and below the component we can put the paginator component, which is the one that is going to allow us to navigate through the different pages of the component. And that's actually it. With this we're good to go. Let me compile and let's come back here, and as you can see we are only displaying 10 items per page. I can go forward in the list of pages, and I can also go back, and we have 100 items. And if I click on here and filter, now as you can see we only have 69 items and only 7 pages. And of course if I remove the filter, then we are back to have 100 items and 10 pages. Now so far we have only been using data in memory, but this may not be realistic in some scenarios. For example, if we only have, say, something like 500 records, it is fine to use data in memory, but if we have thousands of records, then it may be wise to use a web API. So let's see that in fetch data we have an example of data being retrieved from a web API. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take this data from the web API and we're going to use our QuickGrid component. So let's see that. Let's come back here. Let's go to the fetch data component, fetch data, and I will delete this because I don't really need it for this example. I will also delete this, and I don't need this method to be asynchronous, so let me delete all of this and let me use here void, and let's get to work. The first thing that I need is to use this grid items provider delegate, that is the one that is going to pass the data to the QuickGrid component. Now I will also have a bool here, loading equal to true by default, and then in here I'm going to say weather forecast provider equal to async rec, and here as we mentioned this is a delegate, so what we're assigning to it is a function. Let me put a semicolon here. This rec comes from the QuickGrid component and it has some data. For example, it has over what column the user wants to sort. We're going to see an example of that in just a moment. For now, let me cut this and paste it here. And I'm going to say here var response equal to, and then I will say loading equal to false. I need to use a state has changed so that I can update the UI, and then return grid items provided result from items response, which is the data from the web API, and also I have to pass the total item count, and for that I can say count, semicolon here. Now let me come here and let's say the following. I need to have a div that is going to show if loading is equal to true, and I'll do the same for the div that is going to show the grid. So if loading is false, then we're going to show this div and we're going to hide this one. And then I will use our QuickGrid component. Here I have to say items provider, and we're going to pass our weather forecast provider. And now I will pass the 4 columns: date, temperature, temperature in Fahrenheit, and summary. Now let's make a first test. Let me compile my application and let's come back here, and you're going to see that we're going to get a different UI for the data, which is the QuickGrid UI. This is great, this is working. But now, let's say that I want to sort by this column that we have here. So how can we do that? Well, now it is a little bit harder because I need to go to the web API and I need to implement that sorting logic. So let's see that. First, let's come back here and let me say that I want to sort by this column. So I will say sortable equal to true, and also because this is in ascending order by default, I have to put that here is default sort direction ascending. Now, as I mentioned before, here in this delegate we have this rec parameter which contains data about the QuickGrid. And with this we're going to be able to see over which column the user wants to sort. In our case, we're only allowing the data to be sorted over the date column, but the code that I'm going to show you will work even if you have the ability to sort over multiple columns. So let me come here and first let me say sort by ascending. This is going to allow me to know if the user wants to sort in an ascending manner or a descending manner. And also let me say column, over which column does the user want to sort. So let me say rec sort by column title semicolon here. And now I can pass this data over to the web API by using query strings. So let me come here and let me say I want to use string interpolation, query strings. I'll say sort by ascending here equal to this ampersand column. Alright, with this we're passing the data over to the web API. Now I have to go over the weather forecast controller so that we can implement the fact that we want to sort by the date column. So here, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to paste these parameters, and then I'm going to put this in a variable, result equal to, I'll delete this, return result, and here in the middle, I'm going to say if column is equal to date, to the date column, then we're going to say if sort by ascending, and of course here is where you can use either Entity Framework or ADO.NET or Dapper to modify the query so that you can go to the data store, to your data table, and do either the filtering or the sorting or whatever. In our case, we're working with data in memory in the web API, so I only have to do this using LINQ. So let me say here result equal to result order by, and I want to order by date. Otherwise, if sort by ascending is false, then I want to order by descending. So let me say order by descending. And let me say date here also. And that's actually it. With this, we're good to go. Let me press Ctrl F5 to run our application. And here, as you can see, we have that we can sort by this column. Of course, you are seeing these numbers change because this is data that is random. So it is randomly generated every time we hit this endpoint. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that indeed we were able to implement sorting by using the QuickGrid component. And also, of course, as we saw, If you have data in memory, then it is very easy to do this because everything is done for you. Only if you are using a web API, you have to work more because you have to implement all of the logic yourself. If you want to learn more about Blazor, please buy my Udemy course today. I also have courses about Entity Framework Core, concurrency in C#, and more. Link with a discount in the description of this video. Thank you.